Welcome to the module on fund economics. This module is particularly important from a practical perspective. It is too often easier to talk about the capital you expect to deploy than to talk about the money you intend to earn through your work. However, it is important to budget and to negotiate well so you can be well motivated beyond other non-financial incentives you will have on taking this journey. In this module, we talk about the key components of income and compensation in a fund being: number one, salary and bonus funded by management fees. Number two, carried interest being performance-based compensation. We have based the discussion around practical considerations, including salary sacrifice, founder's risk, and succession planning. We also take you through some benchmarking in other and some associated African markets. You will learn about key principles on allocation of carry, the psychology of carry from all perspectives, carry when it is a set of golden handcuffs versus a clear incentive. Finally, we talk about what happens when it is time for people to leave the fund. Many fund managers, especially first-time fund managers, find it difficult to have these conversations, mostly because you are having to negotiate amongst yourselves. We focus on the importance of knowing the way in which these discussions connect to knowing your worth and negotiating for it as an individual, building a compensation strategy, which is helping build a strong team that will last, responding to limited partners' due diligence questions well, justifying how people are incentivized to do well on a mutually reinforced basis. Welcome to Module 9, Managing Fund Economics. This is being presented by Geetha Dhammaratnam. There are two components that we would like to talk about first, which are relating to the key components of income and compensation in a fund. The first one is management fee. As you'll recall from previous modules, this is based on the capital commitments during the investment period and what is actively invested after that time. It includes within it two things. One is the base salary, which is fixed. The other is the annual bonus, which is variable and discretionary. That is going to be paid out of the management fee that you earn from your LPs. The other thing that we're going to look at is performance-based compensation. This is carried interest, and it is subject to, of course, achieving the investment hurdle, and we call it carry. When we look at considerations specific to salary and bonus, you can try and benchmark salary to industry standards. That said, it's quite difficult to get access to industry data of how much people are earning within the investment space, especially given the dearth of information publicly available across the continent. However, you need to utilize your networks and experience to try and get access to that information. In terms of bonuses, while they are discretionary, they are based on both the performance of the individual as well as the team, as well as looking at how well the company has performed after incurring all the expenses it would during that time period. On the carry side, it is heavily tailored to individual and firm preferences, which include seniority and key persons, or people who are considered key to the fund and designated as key persons to the fund by the LPs. A second aspect here you need to consider is carry is usually available for mid-level and senior team members, and it is more significant the more senior you are. And it's not just paid or granted at a single point in time. Carry payments fluctuate after the hurdle has been achieved. So when you're building the financial model for your fund early on, you need to consider the likely change over time for team members of the compensation considerations, also due to changes in team structure or to promotions. The salary and bonus concerns that fund managers may think about, especially given the uncertainty of what is high risk, high reward carry, the real stability in income for those working within a fund management business comes from salary. For first-time fund managers, there's a balance in making sure you and the team can keep your personal lights on. That means being able to keep a roof over your head. And so the first point there is around salary sacrifice, particularly for a first-time fund manager. Limited income can lead to expecting lower salaries because there isn't much money to go around. You want to think about how that affects other elements, including point 2, commitments from your salary, because salary is what is likely going to drive the team's ability to meet their GP co-investments. If the salary sacrifice is too high, the team are going to struggle to make their GP co-investments. The third point, founder's risk. founders can get exhausted by bearing the brunt of the risk with a lower relative salary. And this is keeping in mind that founders usually have the highest opportunity costs, meaning that they are the ones who probably earn the most before coming to this fund. So the salary sacrifice can be very challenging when you compound that with the founder's risk. The fourth point here is around bonus fluctuations. For example, this is about setting up a fund for the first time and knowing that you can have higher non-recurring costs, setup costs, which affect how much capital is left at the end of the day or income is left at the end of the day available for the bonus pool. Bonus timing can be especially problematic for junior or mid-level staff because it affects their focus on counting on these bonuses to address larger ticket personal expenses, whether that's paying off student debt, whether that's trying to get a mortgage, etc. The sixth element here is succession planning. Succession planning is making room and building an institution so that there are people who come behind you to be able to lead this organization in the future. Larger businesses often have clear bonus policies linked to succession plans. What you will need to consider is funds work differently. You do not have as many steps, and therefore that slower career progression, which is deeper, means that you won't necessarily have staff members who are seeing regular promotions with regular changes in bonus and salary. So you need to think about that as you're developing your financial model. So we need to start looking at salary benchmarking, but it comes with a healthy caveat. It's very difficult to find data on salaries for fund managers in Africa. And it's not because of any other reason than it's not actually widely gathered or available at regional or country level. This information tends to be kept quite private, and compensation varies greatly, as you can expect, based on years of experience, fund size, geography, and investment strategy. This information that we found comes from the 2020 Europe and Africa Private Capital Compensation Survey. It's aggregating information from differing markets, and therefore it's here to give you a sense of proportionality more than it is here to give you a sense of actual numbers, which are going to be relevant for you. But looking at this, what probably points out as quite interesting is obviously the larger the fund, the higher the compensation, unsurprising there. But what you start to see is proportionality again between the levels. The general observations on compensation trends, when you look at this in euro, is managing partners tend to have a base salary of about 250 to 260,000 euro. The bonus is about 100 to 110% of the base. Principals make a base of almost half of that at 130 to 140,000 euro, with a bonus of 80 to 90% of the base. And associates make 60 to 70,000 euro with a bonus of 60 to 70% of the base. So these are some numbers that give you a sense of what compensation could look like in terms of proportionality. If you look at the next slide here, what we're talking about here is breaking that down based on the strategy, because the compensation also depends on the investment strategy. For example, managing partners in venture capital earn about 229,000 euro in their base salary compared to partners in direct lending strategy who are making about 275,000 euro. So what is going to be most relevant for you is to get a sense of what the payments are for venture capital and for growth, but keeping in mind that the base, the bonus, and the carry just look very, very different via these strategies because of how these strategies materialize in terms of the duration of time it takes to invest, how quickly new funds are raised, how much time goes into active portfolio management, and that last point, most of it really goes into growth and venture capital strategies. You can also see in the bottom right-hand side, we've got a little table here to show you what the cash compensation looks like by years of experience in thousands of euro. So with very little experience, between 0 and 2 years of experience, the base compensation starts at about 88,000 euro. And the growth over 3 years is about 25%. But if you look at 17 plus years, the base is quite high with a much lower compounded annual growth rate of 5.2%. As fund managers, and especially as first-time fund managers, you are going to have some concerns around carry. These are 6 things that we think are quite relevant and likely to be something that comes to your minds. And the rest of the module is really focused on these 6 areas. These issues around carry are really tough issues to discuss. And the temptation is to kick the can down the road, meaning the temptation is to prolong having that conversation. Avoid that temptation, address compensation early. The first point is who gets carry? At what level of seniority should people get carry? The second is how much carry? What is the right amount to ask for or to give? The third, there's the founder's risk. How do you reward for the extra risk taken by founders, who are usually the most senior members of the team? The fourth, is carry an incentive or is it a pair of handcuffs? Does it motivate or hinder people's performance, especially over the longer period? The fifth point here is you might have a concern about how do you balance carry with the salary sacrifice that usually comes with first-time fund managers. Because if you're reducing what you think you can get on both sides, it becomes hard to remain really motivated to work on the fund. The sixth area is leaving. How do you manage carry allocations when people leave? The bottom line here is whatever happens, do not avoid having these conversations, because if you want to be responsible for managing capital, you need to be able to have these conversations, because money is money and you need to know how this is going to affect motivations. And this is something which investors, LPs, get very granular about to understand how you're being motivated and how you're thinking about it. So let's start with who gets carry. First of all, it is not a science. You want to cover which deal team members, being partners, principals, and others entitled to a share of carry, have access to carry. There are no generally accepted methodologies for deciding who should get what. It is highly based on a negotiation. It is helpful to consult other fund managers and investors to see what they're doing. When you present it to the team, explain the rules of the allocation. Some people will accept it, some people will negotiate with the overt or veiled threats of leaving the firm. This is part of the process, and you need to work your way through it. It really differs market to market and by size of fund as well, by the way. There's a quote here which I thought was quite interesting. Therefore, carried interest can become less of an exercise in rationality and more of a social process or even a bun fight. That is very true. So what you want to do is, in the absence of a science, you need to get creative and come up with some structure. In creating the carry structure, you can start by creating some sort of tier-based system or some sort of clustering. Maybe it's based on seniority. Then you want to allocate a base set of carry for each tier and or a rationale for adjustments. Why one person is worth more, getting more carry, and another person is worth getting less carry. Consider first-time fund manager exceptions, which may not be repeated with follow-on funds. What that means is you may be willing to be more generous with first-time funds in order to encourage people and to entice people to join the firm, knowing that with the second-time fund, when there's more stability, the firm has been around for a while, you have got an institution, you would likely not repeat those first-time exceptions. So if you look at the chart in the bottom right, and the source here is the private equity review from 2019 on the UK side, you get a sense of what the compensation looks like based on the carry allocation looks like based on level, whether you're senior partners, a partner, a director, a principal, or a senior associate. And you will see that regardless of the size of fund, the more junior you are, the less carry that you have. So how much is enough carry? That's a very difficult conversation to have. As a reminder, there is no industry set allocation. Founding partners can typically get stakes ranging from 66 to 75% of the carried interest pool, particularly in first-time funds where the risks are highest and the teams are leanest. As a general rule, at the most junior levels of allocation, usually senior associates, carried interest money at work tends to be in the range of 3 to 5 times the annual cash compensation. That's the salary plus bonus. This multiplier increases to 7 to 10 times at VP or junior director level and 12 to 15 times at director or junior partner level. So it is really significant, and it's intended to be that pot at the end of gold at the end of the rainbow. Remember, not all team members will be eligible for carry within a set title. For example, some directors may be allocated carry, some may not. There will be variation in team responsibilities within and between funds. Carry will also reflect that. Usually, the higher an individual's title and responsibility, the higher is her or his carry. Relevant variables include market competition, uniqueness of fund strategy, structure, and specific expected contributions of the team. This information is information that has come from a particular data set. That may not hold exactly to be true for your fund, because again, as I reminded, there is no industry set allocation. So it depends on what you can negotiate within and amongst yourselves. If you look at the pot of gold at the bottom left-hand side, as a first-time fund, it is not unusual for 3 or 4 founding partners to share up to 75% of the carried interest pool. Staff at all levels will typically get a larger individual percentage stake at a smaller fund. Conversely, even a senior partner will normally get a target allocation of less than 10% of the total pool when the fund is larger than $1 billion. That's because 10% of the carry pool of a $1 billion fund is going to give you more capital than a larger percent of a smaller fund. So the absolute amount that you're getting is also relevant, and that is something you control by virtue of the size of your fund. So a larger number of individuals will also claim a stake when you have a larger fund. You likely will have a larger group of team members working on a larger fund. And the money at work of individual carry stakes is far greater than in a first-time fund. A senior partner with a 7% allocation of a $1 billion to $5 billion fund will have 3 times as much money at work as a partner with a 23% allocation of a fund below $250 million. So this is coming from the Private Fund CFO's contributor survey. And it gives you a sense, again, of dynamics more than it does of actual final numbers. On the bottom right-hand side of the slide, what you see is a table to illustrate the point. And here the source is private equity compensation. The point that we wanted to make here is not everybody within a particular title will, or level of seniority, will get carry. So whilst in this case, 100% of the people who were partners had carry, less than 20% of the people who were analysts had carry. How much is enough carry? The second part of this conversation is around differentiating between founding partners and junior staff. So for example, founding partners naturally become diluted over time to some extent because more recruits become partners or directors in the fund, so the percentage that they have reduces. But distributing carry remains a major issue in managing succession effectively because you want to have more partners, you want to have more people becoming partners. It is about succession planning and building that institution for a long term. A second point here is many founding partners may feel that they are only getting the rewards of their years of effort in funds 3 and 4, as earlier funds were smaller, less meaningful in absolute terms, and that was the point at which they were making the salary sacrifice for the benefit of the whole team. At the same time, the up-and-coming team may feel like they're doing all the work and lining the partners' pockets. These are real dynamics that are at play, and they come out even more robustly when you have Fund 2, Fund 3, and Fund 4. Junior staff, most junior staff often prefer cash, and this can be because they aren't yet sure if they want to be committed to the fund, and they often have high cash needs as a result of the stage of life they're in, and payouts may seem a long way off. Junior employees also don't have much bargaining power compared with senior employees when it comes to carry, and this is usually due to the level of industry experience they are lacking. When you look at a carry performance culture, it's important to also think about what's the culture you wish to have at the firm. And here I'm deliberate about using the term carry performance culture, because carry is supposed to be a direct link to attributable performance. However, you may want to have a culture where you say there are a lot more people than the specific individuals involved in the investment process who have an impact on how this business is doing, how the fund manager is doing, and how the fund manager is managing its relationship with LPs and reporting to LPs, being institutionalized, being able to raise capital, but also to deploy it. So you may think about how to reward senior staff in support functions with carry. Usually this includes chief operating officers, chief financial officers, and heads of fundraising. It depends on the culture of the firm you wish to develop. Some funds give carry to everyone in the team. This is to recognize the part that everyone plays in delivering strong returns on transactions, therefore participating in the upside as well. It brings inclusivity. On the other side, you also want to think about calculating the value of each unit of value of carry and ensure that you understand the financial cost of building a rewards-based culture, which is more inclusive. You need to ensure that carry remains a motivator, because if it becomes a demotivator, it can be a real challenge. And as the business is growing, maintaining the natural bias between those two is a tough thing to do. There are some common challenges when it comes to carried interest. There are 4 or 5 that we're going to talk about here. The first one is it can be tempting to over self-allocate, because those designing the carry allocation can find elaborate justifications for over allocating to themselves. This can create disalignment and it can cause disgruntlement within the team. A second challenge is the misassessment of contributions. Often people tend to overestimate their own contribution to an outcome and underestimate that of others. So having some sort of governance structure allows for multiple voices to be at a table so that there is a clear assessment of what each person is contributing and therefore linking that back to carry. Point 3 is about performance attribution. This is extremely difficult to assess in a deal because most deals involve multiple people to make it successful. And it's at different roles in different stages of the transaction, all the way from sourcing, finding the deal, through to the execution, to the portfolio management, to the exit. So a challenge is, how do you link who has done what? The fourth element, which is a challenge here, is carry can really be seen as a measure of esteem. Some see being valued as being included in the carry scheme. Therefore, if they're not in the carry scheme, they are presuming that they're not valued within the fund manager. This is regardless of whether they receive salaries and bonuses. Others value more. For some, given where they are in life, short-term bonuses are more valued than slow-paying carried interest. However, the psychology around being awarded carry points is something to really reckon with and be aware of. The final point here is drive greater impact. This is a major point. So team members in operations rather than investment roles can really feel like second-class citizens. They are allocated little or no carried interest, and it reduces their motivation. Yet they're the ones who are holding down the fort in terms of having the institutionalized structure, which is carrying the weight of the capital that has been raised in terms of the visibility to your LPs and the engagement with your LPs. They are fundamental. So, given that they are integral for fundraising, you don't want them to feel as if they're just seen as fundraising cosmetics rather than genuine partners. So think about how you are bringing the whole team that are really responsible for the management and the distribution of the capital and the management of the investment subsequently. Incentives have the danger of becoming golden handcuffs. A good incentive system includes mechanisms for people to leave. This opens new career pathways to partnership for more junior members and allows long-standing employees the opportunity to leave unhampered by too many restrictions. That is something worth dwelling on for a moment. It is not a bad thing for people to leave, but you must have those mechanisms in place from the beginning. You want to determine the governance of assessing whether somebody will be a good leaver or a bad leaver, and what the negotiations are going to be of what economics can be retained if they're leaving. People leaving can significantly impact the fund, particularly if they're key people. You'll remember a key person is someone who is designated as such by the LPs. Therefore, if they are leaving, it can result in investors considering it a material change to the fund and therefore can pull out or replace the fund manager. The compensation policy and the specific employment contracts should reference the relevant identification and process of calculating and finalizing separation terms, including the economics. So you need to make sure you have the internal documentation, which is clear and able to provide an opportunity for anyone who is joining, who is getting carry, to understand the terms of that carry. There are different reasons why people may leave. They may be seeking different investment strategies. In recent years, I have seen some people who have preferred to walk away from the private equity side of things in Africa to focus on venture capital. Some people have left to go and pursue a very narrow focused investment strategy around an area they see great opportunities in. A second reason might be a change in lifestyle. A third might be a change in personal circumstances. A fourth was perhaps the person is being poached by other funds. A fifth, they want to do something else entirely. Um, Within the African private equity space, I always joke that many experienced fund managers always talk about walking away and becoming farmers. That seems to be the happy place everyone wants to go to. You also want to have people leave when they have become unfit for the role. They may have health considerations or they've just become disinterested. And as they are thinking about leaving or are seeking to leave, you should have had the clarity from the beginning of what good leaver provisions look like and bad leaver provisions look like. For a good leaver, this can lay out the amount payable to the departing person. These provisions come in many forms, but will frequently define good leaver by reference to specific circumstances: death, disability, retirement over statutory retirement age, long-term illness, termination without cause, etc., with all other circumstances constituting a bad leaver. The sample terms you may include within the legal documents include: a good leaver will commonly obtain the higher of cost and, subject to vesting provisions, fair market value for his or her shares. A bad leaver provision is quite simple. Usually, a bad leaver is anyone who is not a good leaver. And the legal documentation, the LPA and employment contracts will outline good leaver provisions as well as bad leaver provisions. Sample terms include: a bad leaver may expect to receive the lower of fair market value and cost. Within all of this, you also want to keep an eye on vesting. The vesting provisions regulate the proportion of shares for which the departing employee will be entitled to a good leaver price, which is, as we said earlier, the higher of cost and fair market value, by reference to the length of period from buyout to termination. Vesting may be straight line or stepped, and full vesting may typically occur after a period of between 3 and 5 years. That allows for people to have the temptation to stay, a little bit of the golden handcuff situation, during a time when it is critical that they're really in the fund, when the capital is being deployed. Though that said, there is an increasing lengthening of investment holding periods, and that is likely to stretch vesting as well because it's taking longer to deploy capital. Therefore, it should take longer to vest as well. There's a lot that we've covered in this module, and there are 6 tips, but in reality, there are a lot more. The main one that I would start with is start early. Approach the issue of fund economics and team compensation from the outset. They are critical for the strategy of your entity. They will go a long way to forming a cohesive group that could be together and successful for a very long time. Avoiding this difficult conversation is not a good start. The second point here is culture carry. It is a nice idea to be generous with carry to develop an inclusive culture. However, you should know what that will cost you. Others within the team will calculate the value of that inclusivity, and it can stir up emotions which are not necessarily good emotions. So really calculate the value of each carry point and let that guide the decisions that you're making. Because remember, when it comes to compensation, you are dealing with salary, you're dealing with bonuses as well as carry. You want to keep motivating. It takes active management to ensure that carry remains a motivator. It can otherwise fast become a demotivator or toxic to the culture as well as to the performance of the team. The founder's risk is going to be something which you'll keep coming back to. Founding partners feel the sharpest pinch in balancing reward for the extra risk taken with economics that reward them. Have these discussions openly, state the sacrifices being made and quantify it, because failure to do so means that you are presuming that others understand your sense of what your sacrifice is, and it can soon become a disincentive, and that too, an unknown disincentive. Cash and carry. Salary pays the bills, carry covers the dreams. However, the motivation to remain and do the hard work is affected by company culture, professional engagement, and people liking where they work and whom they work with. That is all about building an institution and making sure that you are helping people feel like they're part of the team. Finally, you want to remain true. And what we mean by that is you want to remain true to the purpose of carried interest, because the purpose of carried interest is to align the interests of GPs and LPs. That way, the better the GP performs, the higher the returns to LPs, and the higher the carry to GPs as a reward. Keeping true to that intent and maintaining the waterfall calculations, which is the hurdle, catch up, and carried interest with transparency and without errors, is really important. So people know what it is that they are working as hard as they are for. Investing and managing investments is not easy, but it is tremendously interesting. It is exciting. It is a very different way of working than a 9 to 5 job, if those exist. So the ability to really bring together the compensation elements and to have the discussions around the fund economics means that you're able to ensure you're living within your means as a fund manager, but you're similarly ensuring that people are really motivated with their compensation to get to the outcomes that you are seeking with your fund.